what's going on, guys? It's me, Trainman, and welcome back to Block Placing Simulator 2012. Actually, because, well, I had to learn this technique because Plateau isn't so great anymore, and it may be a little bit faster than Plateau in general. Maybe a lot faster, as a matter of fact. I just don't feel as screw that up there. I just don't feel as in control sometimes. Anyways, we have to, that giant section that we made last episode, we now have to get up to the proper minimum height. And now those of you that have watched me build in the past, of course, probably understand what I mean by minimum height, but for those of you that don't, here goes. The minimum height is the lowest you will be putting track and terrain features that aren't either cuts or riverbeds. You know, something that would already be a valley. A minimum height is employed such that you'll have less work to do in the long run with raising your terrain features from a certain height to the height you desire them to be at. The reason we use one here is because, as a minimum height implies, we won't be getting anywhere below 200 feet, which is what the minimum height is, unless we're trying to build the river valley, or, you know, the little ditch that the river flows in, I should say. It's not much of a river, it's more of a creek. Or some other downward sloping terrain feature that I don't think we're going to have. So, keeping in mind that any areas where we'd be on a sort of cliffside are going to be higher up on the line after we've begun to climb, or even towards the very tail end where we've finished climbing. And that means that the minimum height there will have to be higher. So I may be building secondary minimum heights, but maybe not just yet. I have no doubt that I will be sometime in the future, but I'll be using the plateau tool for those because they'll be much smaller in terms of actual changes and actual sizes of those areas. By the way, this is at an unprecedented 5 times speed. I wanted to get the episode down to to around 20 minutes, which it's at 25. So that's okay, I guess. Really wasn't quite what I was aiming for, but it gets the job done. And the reason I'm trying to narrow these down is because, you know, come on. You guys don't need to listen to me ramble for that long, and I'm just kind of doing the same thing. So I can get more done and speed it up and spend the same amount of time in an episode. Or, you know, spend more episodes doing less. And I'd rather do the former. And I can speed it up even more for extra excitement when it comes to me running circles around here at 5 times speed, filling in grass. The grass texture, I should say. We actually fill in quite a bit of grass coming up in the episode when we go back and put the finishing touches on Waterville there. And it's the kind of grass that I'll be employing for the rest of the route to make everything look nice and good. Also, with a 418-ton train of 20 log cars and a caboose, I managed to get through the Drumlin Field, which is this section of the map, if you recall, using a Pacific, so a 462, and a, I don't even know what they're called. It was an 042. So it wasn't quite a 40, but it was testing to see if my SR and RL engines theoretically could make it. And I'm going to say yes, but only together, which is a plot point, if you will, for things that could be occurring on this route in the future. Unfortunately, the SRL engines are to drive, so it's not exactly something I'm looking forward to, or I won't be using them in a run session. However, I will gladly use the British stuff that I got. And once we connect these guys, hopefully we'll have them connected by episode 123, I think is the next run session, and that's in 4 4 or 5 episodes. Okay, so here's a little technique. I'm pulling back the water so that I can get a better... Okay, the game froze here. Don't panic. I'm pulling back the water so I can get a better look at the edge here and get this sort of brown clay texture, which I guess is what we're going for the floor of the lake, in right up against the shoreline there, because there were a few spaces where I missed, and later lakes use a technique that prevents me from missing so badly, or missing at all. It all comes down to the order that I color the lake in. And you guys will see that later in the episode, of course. So, for now, we're just going to put the water back. And something that didn't occur to me then, but just occurred to me now, is that we didn't do the interior edge. We didn't do the edge along the island. So it still might be a little screwier on there. Alright, so here's us making this lake. It's already painted green, the outside. So we're going to paint brown the inside. Grab the edge texture and edge it up. And then fill in the edges around there, so that we didn't have to pull the water back, which, is just another step that we don't need to do. So here we are back in the town. I think we're about to whip out the grass. Okay, yeah, so I had to go to this area of the map to get the right kind of grass splines, because I didn't know what they were called. And then go back into here and start placing this stuff down. That is the wrong one. That was far too large. Something I've learned when placing down splines, like grass and trees, that are natural in nature, I guess, that are natural splines. You're not going to want to place them down. You're not going to want to stretch them out a lot. You're not going to want to keep them all independent and organized. What you want to do is actually make them so that you get. I just wanted to see what that was, so that you sort of get a mismatch of what things look like. Like, if you'll notice, I'm placing them at random angles, I'm overlapping some of them, I'm stretching them out to different lengths sometimes, although the grass and the trees and things, they don't do that very well. So I had to pull that back a little bit, made a little road there, raised that to show that, of course, dirt above the tracks. And we're not going to only use one kind of grass spline here, which is why I'm leaving some gaps. Because, you wouldn't only have a handful of kinds of grass, necessarily. You'd probably have a lot. So here's me going over with a different grass spline to get some different colors in there. And we'll be using a total of maybe 4 or 5 different grass splines around here, because, well, I'm basing it on what the ground cover is. I'm basing it on what the texture is underneath the grass and seeing what would fit it best. For example, this dry stuff obviously would go with some browner grass and some, yellowish green grass, whereas the very green stuff you'll see in a bit, I actually use some very green stuff for. And that sort of dark brown doesn't lend itself to the yellows as much as the light brown does. So that's why we're using that. Using the spline number 4 more often. Okay, but soon enough I'm going to come back to the edge of the Y there and start sprucing things up with some other splines. I think I come along here with that. That's the wrong one. I wanted that one, because that's sort of more grassy green spline going into the forest, and then we get the really green spline, which is something I've used quite frequently, because I just like the way it looks. And, yeah. There's a section you'll see later where I'm inspecting roads to see where stuff would come out, to make sure that a road connection I was sending off into the middle of nowhere had somewhere to come out. And of course the line is abandoned past that red block, so yeah, there's that. And now I'm placing down trees. Once again, random angles, overlapping, that sort of thing. I realized, though, I was just kind of testing the route later, as I said. I didn't bring the tree splines nearly close enough to the actual edge of the track there, because I had huge open spaces. It did not at all force me to reroute the trackage to make room for the trees, which is something I had been doing on the island, and something that I wanted to continue doing but didn't. So I'm going to have to continue doing that, obviously. We only get this side of the track treed up, though, and then I think I retire and go to class, and then I come back and work on some more stuff in just a minute or so. But we're going to tree this side of the line up, all the way up to, game locked up again, all the way up to where the green ends there. And the reason the green ends there is because I wanted some definitive points where I know it's a work in progress past this point, and I'm not ready to put the scenic into this area. Which is why I'm building up to close to the edge of it with the other stuff. So there's this area that I wanted to take care of as well, between the current main and the abandoned section. One of the many abandoned sections. So that gets done, but I don't work on the other side of the track. I just sort of fill in that area. And I go, okay, that's enough trees for now. I've got to go to class, and I will be back in a second. And then a second later, I go, boop, and I am grabbing the same textures again for doing what we were doing before. So I started doing one lake at a time here. Ends up being a bad decision. So we do this one lake, right? And I decide, no, wait, let's just get the green, our, foresty green that we're using. It's not really that foresty, it's not like deep forest green, but I think it's a very good all-purpose green. Right up there with the, default texture on 06. And so we just start covering every water feature with the green, or the edges. Including our little Kettle Lake there, our, couple of stretched out lakes, this one that pokes off the edge of the map there, this weird looking one with its, secondary lake. And I was more than once tempted to go ahead and start working on terrain out there, but I'm at the point where I'm a little bit, I want to do the 2-foot gauge in the same way that I did the 2-foot gauge here, which is bring land, or put track on land, instead of raise land to track. That doesn't mean build the land beforehand, but you guys saw how I was building it here in episodes past, and that's what I want to continue doing, except this is a very long stretch, and I will get tired of doing that shortly. It's just something that needs to get done, so that's my work. I grabbed the sand because obviously the ocean floor over here is not going to be the dirty, polluted ocean floor right outside of Davenport there. And I like the way the two are blended right over there. If you got to look at it for a second, there's the very, very dark stuff around the port, and then there's this sand that's just sort of everywhere else. And it really points out, okay, this area is, this area is messy. This area needs, the area right outside of the port obviously has a lot of the outwash from the factories and everything, and you can see it in the sediment. However, everywhere else isn't affected by that, because they don't have the farms and factories. You'd think outside of Brandville maybe you'd have, no, because, A, they aren't that close to the ocean, and B, they don't grow anything there, so you wouldn't have fertilizer. You wouldn't have those algal blooms that I talked about in a previous episode, I believe, with the Kettle Lakes and my geology teacher. So, here we go, just dulling up the edges of this, and I come back and redo it again and again. And there were a few times where I actually went and I looked up bluffs, and I looked up dunes, because I was like, alright, what color does this really need to be? What color should it be? And I ended up settling on, you'll see later, but for the beach edge there, I obviously went with the sand. And then I went with a little bit of darker sand, which is going to be the beach closer to shore. And then I have this stuff, which is supposed to, I was going to put trees on, I believe, and grass, and was supposed to represent sort of dunes, but I end up changing the texture later. I'm not sure if I should have stuck with that one or not, but that's what we're doing now. So now comes the time to block out all of this area with green. Because, just like everything else here, it's going to be green. We've got the esker there, which is where we terminate our greenery, because that area is still a work in progress. Obviously, this area is as well. We haven't got buildings in it yet, but at least here I had a plan for what I was going to do. The model I'm going for, the model I went for, is actually the private beach, quasi-private beach, where my parents and their parents had, well, my parents and my dad's, it's easiest to say my dad's side of the family has a tiny, tiny beach cottage, and we go down to hang out by the beach and go in the water and stuff like that, because Rhode Island, we've got lots and lots of coastline, even for, I think, I'm not sure. I'm sure places like Hawaii could give us a run for our money. Or maybe, I don't know, but I think we've got more miles of shoreline per square mile of state than any other state, but it's tough for me to say. I either want to go on the side of, well, of course we do, we're a tiny state, or, you know, maybe there is somebody out there that is significantly larger, but has a lot more coastline. I don't know. It was just something I read a while back about our coastline, and really wasn't sure. Never went to verify it. The person who would, or the state that would probably give us the biggest run for our money is, like, Hawaii. Or another East Coast state, like maybe Maryland, that's got a hell of a lot of coastline. But I'm not entirely sure, because Rhode Island is very small, and we've got plenty of coastline to go around. Especially considering how many islands we have. Fun fact, the reason we're called Rhode Island is because Roger Williams, our founder, believed that the bay, the bay reminded him of the Isles of Rhodes, which if you ever look it up, it's a place in the Mediterranean Sea where there's just a lot of islands, and they're all over the place. And that's, that's exactly how it is. It was a little weird sandbar looking thing there, I went and fixed it. So, now we're just doing the model around the rivers, and I'm going to have to go back up and down the river to get rid of the spot in the middle of the river that we inevitably missed. So I just paint the whole thing, because why not? It's not going to hurt anything. Not like too many people are going to be looking under the water anyways, and I'm spinning it the whole time so it blends nonetheless. Then we go around and get the edges of the lakes, which need to be mudded up. Even the little lakes. Whoop, there we go. And this area. There's a lot of areas over here that I painted over straight green, and I'm going to have to go back and do detail work in. That means, you know, sort of rocky outcroppings, rock walls, you know, essentially what would be cuts and embankments, but aren't. And of course over here we've got a lot more to do. Now I noticed this area right there, we sort of have a point to deal with, was bringing the grass out as far as I deemed necessary. Even though we end up replacing some of that grass later, and I will be. Alright, so I had to come... Okay, yeah, I was looking for a road. There's the road. I had to make sure there was a road pointing in the direction of Blindside Bluff, which is where this is, so that I could build a road pointing back at it. Because if there was a road pointing into the middle of nowhere here, it wouldn't make any sense. And, I mean, obviously if there's nowhere for the road to go, the road ain't going there. The thing about it is, though, we've got the 2-foot gauge pointed that way, so theoretically the 2-foot gauge went to Davenport? Question mark? Although that's kind of doubtful, considering. It's entirely possible that the 2-foot gauge goes off to some intermediary point and then terminated a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But there's honestly no evidence of that, and I like to sort of ground the routes in exactly where stuff goes. Especially when we've got a piece of rail pointing at another piece of rail and it never shows up over there. Had a lot of trouble with this road until it decided to turn into a switch. And so we're basically gridding streets here, and we're going to put sort of suburbia-styled houses. Maybe not really nice ones, but sort of suburbia-styled housing in this area, which I'll have to go back to Sugar Creek to look at that and maybe grab some houses out of the menu that are related to the ones in Waterville. We got a lighthouse there. We've got a lighthouse that turns. We've got another one, but I went with the other one because it looks sort of shoddy. We've got a boat as well. I never thought I'd be on a boat. Anyways, I realized at some point, that's a spline and I didn't realize it, so I started playing with it. I realized at some point that the station hadn't been named yet, and I go back and do that. But before I do that, I put these telephone poles down. Now, I will be honest and give credit where it's due. The reason I thought to do telegraph poles is because on Milky's section of this map, which isn't attached yet, he did telegraph poles, and I went, oh man, that's right. I need that. So I'm going to be doing that more often and attaching it to more sections. I'm going to be going through and redoing pretty much everything I've done and just running telegraph poles alongside it, or telephone poles by this day and age. Because it makes sense. They should be there. And of course, they're functioning as power poles here because, well, if we're taking inspiration from Roy Carpenter's Beach, there's just power lines everywhere. They're all over the place. Alright, so we've got this. Blindside Bluff. Ka-ching. I go to edit this. I end up leaving the amount of people on the platform and the amount of maximum people as is, because it's sort of now not a resort, I guess, but it's a destination of interest. And that's the only reason why the 2-foot gauge still runs out there. Because it runs passenger service in towards the main line. Which is also the only reason why Lee's line still runs passenger service, because it runs a connecting service. Of course, you can drive up from Davenport, and plenty of people do. You can drive up from Sugar Creek, rather, is where that road comes out. And plenty of people do. But some people prefer to take the train out there. Which is, nice to see. Especially because, you don't want to bother finding a place to park once you've got out here. Okay, also, this is me going through, every single green there is, and looking for one that I like. Every time I found one, it was like, no, this isn't good. I put that up there to remember it, and I ended up using it again. But I didn't want it down here. It was far, far too green. Then I found this, and went, okay, now this is something I can get behind. It's sort of a mix between the organic and the rocky, which is the sand, obviously. And we've got those veins of clay in the hills, which is really what I was going for. You see those at Rick Carpenter's as well. You don't see these cliffs, however. These cliffs are probably taller than Rhode Island is. Just period. And I come along here, and there are some areas that I'm going to spruce up. Yeah, I put a vein of clay in there. To show that there's some significant height difference. And I've come along here, and I start just sort of sanding everything up. Which is, the terraining, not the terraining, but the actual texturing here is probably going to be the most interesting out of the route, because I'm using more than my 3-color palette, which is really what I've been doing. And it's got me decently far. Especially when you're just sort of perusing through woods. It's not necessarily a big deal to have new colors every 5 feet. Top of that, there aren't really any terrain features for me to exercise that ability on until we got to here. We had a valley and a river and, nothing really interesting. Nothing that would be prototypically colored in such an interesting way. You guys might look at me funny for just overtopping the drumlins with trees, but that is exactly what they look like in real life. It's odd, but it's true. Alright, so here we go, rounding out the episode, and I guess I will see you guys next week. Trainman out.